Good morning. I was around 8 years old and on vacation with my family. It was a beautiful day out. My mom, dad, and I were hanging out near an outdoor swimming pool. As I cheerfully skipped around without any shoes on, exactly what my parents told me not to do, I felt my foot land on the edge of the pool. I quickly lost my balance as my tiny feet failed to grasp onto the slippery tile. Before I could react, I fell backwards into the water. This all happened so quickly that somehow in my panic, all my swimming skills escaped me. I felt helpless as my throat clogged and my body tensed up while the water surface and the oxygen I needed to breathe moved farther and farther away from me. And so I sank and sank and sank, thinking this could be the end of everything. Then all of a sudden, my dad, absolutely heroic, jumps right into the water, grabs me by the arm, and drags me out of suffocation and darkness. I don't remember much that happened afterwards, but I imagine crying parents, CPR, and a very bad day in general. That experience was quite traumatizing to me. I became afraid of water, had to retake all my swim lessons, and spent years before I could get used to using a normal shower head because I hated the feeling of having water running down my face. I've also developed a terrible reflex to any form of liquid that could possibly block my nose or mouth, so much so that to this day, going to paint dance takes so much courage for me. That being said, being somewhat hydrophobic was never something that defined me or brought me major setbacks. That is, except for being cut from the sailing team freshman year. And then last Thanksgiving, I got to talking to my mom. As we were reminiscing about all the silly things I had done as a kid, I realized we had never really talked about this particular event. And so I said, "Mom, tell me about that time that I drowned." "Drowned? What do you mean you drowned?" my mom asked in an earnest confusion. "You don't remember? We were at a pool and I fell in?" My mom paused for a second, chuckled, and went on to tell me the following story. My mom and I arrived at my swim lesson one day before my instructor got there, and I, with my confidence after a couple weeks of lessons, proudly told my mom that I would go into the pool to warm up on my own. As I climbed down the pool ladder, I slipped on the metal steps and dropped into the water. My mom, who was right on the side of the pool, reached out her hand and simply pulled me out. That was it. And my dad, he wasn't even there. As you can imagine, I was in utter shock when I heard all of this. How is it possible that the nightmare I've wrestled with for most of my life was never even real? How can the vivid memory of the bright sun, white tiles, and my dad's plaid shirt all be my own imagination? As I thought about it, these questions actually aren't that hard to answer. I was probably freaked out when I slipped and fell into the pool that day, and over time started to unconsciously gather bits and pieces from my other life experiences to form an imaginary event that justifies the emotional shock. Gradually, I've convinced myself that the image in my head, a near-death experience, was what had actually occurred, and moved on to develop physical responses that mirrored that imagination. Now, I'm not here to disregard traumatic experiences. I think we all know how powerful they can be. However, me slipping into the kids' pool with my mom by my side should have never been one of those. As a kid, I was so worked up about the fall right after I'd gained some confidence that I let it get to my head. I made it the traumatic experience that it is to me. Looking at it this way, I realized that what I'd done to myself as a kid was just an extreme case of something the teenager in me, and perhaps some of you, still do today. Sometimes I find myself botch something so hard that the cringe tells my brain to never ever try doing it again. In the beginning of the school year, Rowan, Eunice, Henry, and I started our own band, Galaxy Flavored. For our first song together, we picked Out of the Black by Royal Blood, a heavy metal jam that was pretty hard for all of us. Well, maybe not for Henry. But as we spent days and days perfecting the song together, we were finally ready to take it to the school meeting stage. We started the song, the tempo was good, and I hit all my fills perfectly. I clearly remember thinking to myself halfway through, wow, Coco, you're doing so great today. Good for you. And then we reached the final part of the song. Climaxing, the ending is basically a mixture of solos from all the instrumentalists, and mine consisted of extremely fast 30-second notes between the crashes, the snare, hi-hats, and toms. In other words, it was really fast and hard. The stress got the best of me. I missed a fill and lost my place in the song. I had no idea when the song was supposed to end. This is probably one of the worst mistakes one can make on stage. And after I scrambled to finally end the song, all four of us knew just how badly I'd screwed up. I cringed so hard after that performance. The good jobs from my friends just weren't doing it for me because I knew in reality how much I'd messed up. For a couple of weeks, I'd always skip that song whenever it comes up on Spotify because it just reminds me of how bad a failure my drumming was that day. I didn't feel like doing any more band practices either, because seeing my band members only made me think of my onstage catastrophe. And then one day, I was talking to Mr. Keller about all of this during our drum lesson. After he quietly listened, he simply said, "You should have known the bass and guitar lines to help you get back into the song." I stuttered to come up with a response because I realized he made a great point. Not just about me not knowing the other parts, but more so that this was something I needed to work on. Yes, I did mess up pretty badly on stage, but that embarrassment shouldn't have taken over my brain and stopped me from having any future fun with these guys. I'm so glad I continued to play with these three amazing musicians throughout the year and was able to enjoy many more performances that were nothing but great. You see, it's easy to fall into the trap of completely dismissing something after a big or seemingly big failure. Just like how snails would immediately retreat into their shells in response to a shock, I find it so natural to shut off any possible harm by completely escaping from the cause of the shock. However, sometimes that's not the most rewarding thing to do. Sometimes giving something a try just isn't enough. Sometimes it's giving things a second try that truly allows you to let go of any untrue or exaggerated feelings in your head due to your unsuccessful first try. For those of you who don't know, I'm a competitive yo-yo player. That means I do know how to walk the dog or go around the world, but it also means that I go to competitions where many players compete by showcasing their own routines. These routines are then judged through a complicated system where a final scaled score is calculated to rank each player. In the competitive world, a discard is probably the most dreaded thing that could happen on stage. Discard is if you choose to change your yo-yo during a routine, usually due to accidental knotting in the string that cannot be quickly fixed. The reason why discards are horrible is because 1, 5 points are automatically deducted, and 2, you lose time during your routine that could have been used to gain points and therefore leading to more lost points. At Massachusetts State's, I witnessed Michael Curdy, one of my favorite players of all time, get so frustrated after a discard that he straight walked off stage without finishing his routine and gave up on what could have been at least a top 3 title. At Nationals that year, I stood on stage hoping for one thing: no discards. It would be okay to miss a trick or two, but a discard would have been too disruptive to my routine. And, you're already expecting it, a minute into my routine, I created a big knot in my string and had no other options but to quickly change my yo-yo. I finished my routine, letting muscle memory kick in, telling myself that it didn't really matter anymore. There's no way I'd still place high with a discard. I walked off stage a little bummed out, upset that the discard monster had befallen me. What was really strange was I placed really well in that contest. With the 5 points deducted and everything, my routine was still strong enough to put me at second place. I came to realize that a discard really isn't the death of a routine, as everyone around me and myself had thought before. It was just so feared that many players let it get to their heads when a discard does occur on stage and fail to complete the rest of the routine cleanly with a flustered mind. Not thinking much about it on stage actually helped me ameliorate the discard's effect to its minimal. At this point, I hope you see the message I'm trying to tell. I'm not here to preach to you to continue trying things and getting back from failures. However, I do hope my stories give you some perspective about just how important it is to not let your own minds exaggerate your setbacks and impede you from exploring further. So maybe don't dismiss math as a subject just because you didn't do so well in geometry. Maybe don't hesitate taking that buzzer shot just because you missed your last one at a big game. Don't let the tiny hindrances build up in your head until you become mentally convinced that you're physically unable to do something. To underclassmen, don't give up on the school if your first experiences here didn't meet your expectations, because you have so much more time to make the best out of this place. To those a little older, don't let any one occurrence dominate in the repression of what you can and cannot do. And finally, to the mighty class of 2017, I hope we can all move on to the next phases of our lives, knowing that whatever setbacks that might come our way will never be as bad as we think them to be, and have no doubt we'll all be able to carry through and thrive wherever we may be. I would like to tell you a final story. As you all know, the entire sixth form went whitewater rafting as our beginning of the year class trip. For my boat, Kennedy and Ritika sat in front as our adventurous ones. Eunice and I sat behind them, and then Ariana in the back. Our boat cruised down the water on that lovely day, going down rapids with our delicate rowing skills. Then all of a sudden, we hit a rock, and everything starts to roll in slow motion. I saw Ken falling out of the boat, and as she does so, her arms spanned wide and flown back toward my shoulders. Now I also was falling out of the boat, with a face that would later described by Ritika as, you could tell she was so done. And by Eunice as, I was laughing so hard at you guys until I saw your face. I hadn't told any of them about my extreme fear of drowning. I felt myself going into the cold water, hearing only muffled sounds and seeing only fluctuating images. My body immediately tensed up, my chest felt stuffed. I was unable to breathe again. Thanks to the life vest, however, I was quickly floating. I was quickly floating, and before I knew it, everyone had already pulled me out of the water. Everything became okay within 10 seconds, and I was again sitting in the boat, laughing with my friends and hearing them joke about Ken's and my horrific fall. I'm not saying that that experience got me out of my fear of water. It didn't. But I do think it showed me that even for something I've struggled with for so long, I can still get through them just fine. So really, that one thing you think you screwed up or will screw up horribly on, give it another try, because I bet it's not as bad as you think. Thank you.
Please remain standing to sing the school hymn.